Good morning. This is Debbie Gilmer. We're broadcasting from Bangor this morning. In the room we have Frank Gagan, Betsy Hopkins, Lisa Sturdivant, and our guest today, Corey Smith. We're here because it's also the first day of the first of our community of practices funded under ODEP on customized employment discovery. So we're be meeting with a group of folks here in Bangor later this afternoon. But without further ado, unless anybody else has any announcements, I'm going to turn it straight over to Corey. Thanks for coming, Corey. Welcome.
Thanks, everybody. So I'm just going to wait for a moment for the PowerPoint to come up, right?
I see it already. So
okay. All right. So what I was asked to do, and if you've had the chance to read the article, Big Sign Syndrome, it's about a 3-page article, and if you've never had it, you can email me, and I'll be happy to send it to you. But I think it's kind of it's been really a life-changing piece for me. So Debbie asked me to come up with an operational definition for Big Sign Syndrome. And I think it's this more typical job finding practice that we all kind of get sucked into, where we go down retail row and we end up applying for jobs at the big box stores. And what happens is normally, you know, people with disabilities applying for jobs at the big box stores, and you have to apply for a job online. Oftentimes there's personality testing involved in that, and then a person with a disability goes through multiple interviews, being compared to large groups of other folks who don't have disabilities, which is really tough, right? So I can. So this is Matt, and if some of you folks from Maine have ever been to a Wegmans, Wegmans is the big yuppie grocery store chain in eastern Pennsylvania and in New Jersey. You can literally go on a date on Saturday night at Wegmans. They have a bar. They have the most incredible deli. They have all this stuff. But before 2007, Wegmans was really, really supported employment friendly, right? And we had about 11 people working at Wegmans across 5 or 6 stores. And what's happened is Wegmans hasn't hired many of our folks since about 2008. So if you remember the crash in 2007, what happened at that point was this is where in the fall of 2007, the sport plan program I was running, we developed about 12 jobs in September, 13 jobs in October, 14 jobs in November, about 10 in December. We were breaking all kinds of records. Voc Rehab was moving money around from office to office to help us out. And then if you remember, when the economy crashed and, you know, we had the stimulus money and the election, we developed 0 jobs in January, we developed 0 jobs in February, and 1 job in March, right? So people really started to curtail. So at this point, we started looking at moving from, you know, we've done support employment pretty well for a really long time, but support employment started morphing into being kind of job placement with, yeah.
we're going to move Corey because we can't move the phone. Technical glitch. I don't think that matters to anybody other than.
So in 2008, January, we had the crash of the economy, and then we started looking. We having large human resource departments we're dealing with, and then all of a sudden somebody has to be a qualified job candidate, and we're getting into this comparative model of employment, right? We're comparing people with disabilities to all these other folks. You can run the screen for me then? And then people are applying for jobs and going through multiple interviews. So the question is are we doing job development or job finding? There's another big chain that we deal with in Pennsylvania and New Jersey called Wawa. And Wawa is this incredible deli. They'll end up in Maine one of these days. put inside of a gas station. And Wawa had been really disability friendly for a really long time, and now they have this thing where you have to sign a contract to have somebody work there, and you have to sign liability. You have to do all this crazy stuff people don't want to do. So I'm doing some work in New Jersey, and I got to be friends with a manager at a Wawa, and I said, what gives? What's going on? And after a few drinks, she said, off the record? And I said, well, absolutely off the record. She said, about a year ago, I had a school-to-work transition person bring a young man in who I knew from the town I live in, who's on the spectrum, and she said he's really fascinated with Wawa. He really likes deli work. We're wondering if he could come in and do a little job shadowing and get his hands dirty. And he's fascinated. There's this big coffee bar. So he walked over to the coffee bar, and he picked up 2 full jugs of coffee, and he looked at the job coach, and he nodded, and she said no. And he took the 2 crafts of coffee, and he crashed them together. They were glass, and he broke the glass, and he burned himself, and he got coffee all over the place. And the manager asked the transition person, did you think he'd do that? He said, well, he threatened, but I never believed he'd do it. So most communities you go to, there's the infamous list of all the supportive employers, and people have a tendency to keep going back to the same places over and over and over. And what we've done is we're burning out employers that way. So that's a process that has to stop. So the question is, with a lot of our performance-based work, when people are under pressure to develop jobs, sometimes we have these bad habits, but bad job matches are costly to job seekers, employers, and all kinds of relationships. The other thing is, now with high schools in a lot of places in the country, the infamous list of where everybody works, we have high school kids going there and doing work for free. So a typical job placement is really getting difficult. These are some of the reasons we have to come up with other opportunities to develop jobs. So with customized strategies, what we're looking at, if you look on this chart, we're having the most success with those employers that have 1 to 19 employees or single owner businesses. The bigger group, there's I think regular job placements coming back because people are becoming aware. But when we're dealing with people with more significant disabilities, this is where we're having the most success. And these are the relationships that we don't even normally have, and you have to kind of get to know your community to know these people. So what we want to do is focus on smaller businesses, right? Developing these strategies, getting to know our communities, but looking at these employers with 1 to 19 employees. In these places, you typically don't have to deal with human resources because they don't have human resources. So here's the next screen. This is the bottom line. So if you look at, folks, we're that collective 12%. We're the employment agencies. And most people get their jobs through networking, through who they know. So we've got to be a lot more connected to our communities. So we talk constantly about finding smaller artisanal businesses, and I go all over the country, and people say, Corey, we don't have those around here. So they drive me up and down Retail Road for a while, and we take a drive 3 blocks in either direction, and there's all these artisan businesses. Oh, well, I didn't even know they were here. So we have Big Sign Syndrome is asking you, it's getting stuck on Retail Row, and we have to just get off of Retail Row for a while. So how do we find these places? We look in industrial parks. We join business organizations, the Chamber of Commerce, Small Business Development Center. In the cities, you check new business licensing. My wife is a small business owner, and right now, she's involved 3 days a week with small business, women's networking, and she's getting all of her business from women's small business associations. But the biggest thing is this idea of social capital and getting to know our community, right? That's where everything happens. So here's what we're trying to avoid. I'm assuming that on the call, there must be a few employment specialists that can relate to this picture. You ever feel this way? I stole this. This is a Fuller Brush Company guy. And I know I feel this way every February. I'm going to knock on one more door and hear no. I'm just going to jump off a bridge. So we want to help the employment specialists. We don't want to burn out all these young, talented people. We want to stick you around, and we want you to be. We're going to offer you help. Is what we want to do with a customized strategy. So obviously, we have this limitation, right, with our strategies. And we put these other screens in just to explain this a little deeper for folks. But oftentimes, you know, if you're a young person and you graduate from college and you start this job and you don't have many connections, that's okay. We're going to help you build these, and we're going to offer people that are going to help. So one of the things we do in training is we do relationship mapping. So if I was around doing the ACRE training, we sit down with people and we ask people, you know, and I'd like you to actually think about this sitting at your desk right now, is who is your honorary mayor? If you ever read the book Tipping Point, these people that are connectors. So an honorary mayor, let me give you an example. Oftentimes it's your parent, it's your minister, it's your best friend from high school. It's if you went to a basketball game last night and you're with a family member, and it's that person, you know, they can't sit down because they're connecting and they're chatting everybody, that person that can talk the bark off a tree. So I moved from Michigan to Pennsylvania about 12 years ago, and I coached Little League football, right, for a few years and made friends with these two guys, Len and Steve, that are both from Quakertown, Pennsylvania. I can tell you I haven't seen Len in about 17 months right now. He's a surgical assistant. He's personality plus. If I needed a connection to do an informational interview somewhere in Quakertown, Pennsylvania, if he wasn't in surgery, I'd say, I need this, and about 3 minutes later, he'd text back and say, call Joey, went to high school, tell his wife I said hi, and he's to help you out. So who is that person in your life that helps you make connections? You want to Lisa Sturdivant, one of those people. So, you know, we start with that, and then we want to figure out how do we help other people figure this out. So the other thing we do in training is we ask people to create a list of all the small businesses that you know in your own life. So usually on the call there's somebody that's always just been a part of the public sector, and they're like, I don't know anybody outside of government. That's okay, but let me ask you a question. Who cuts your hair? Who fixes your car? So we all have these connections, right? So we have to get to know, we really have to get to know the community. And we need to think about these things. The other thing within an organization, this is an old Dale DeLeo trick, is that if I walked into your organization, first thing I'll ask is if you get to know the accounts payable person, and say, can you show me the list of our accounts payable? And sometimes that list is 200 employers, you know, business owners, and I ask, how many people do we have working for these organizations? And then accounts payable says, oh, about 2. So how do we build these connections? You know, how do we use that reciprocity? How do we use our personal or economic social capital? So one of the things I'm having the most fun with these days is developing community action teams. You know, you're not alone out there. There are voc rehab folks. There are supports coordinators. There are employment providers. There are families. There are school-to-work transition people. But we want to help people make connections. So we're building community action teams, and we design them a little bit. We get started, and then maybe we tweak them a little bit. If we figure out we're going into self-employment, there are always small business owners that will help, as long as we're careful not to waste their time, that we really make sure that we use people's time in a smart way. So in New Jersey, of all places, that is not as advanced as Maine, I've got everybody convinced that a community action team requires food, right? It's got to be a pizza party. So people have gone to team meetings in buildings with social workers and heard about deficits forever. That's not what we're talking about. This is a different process, and it needs to be handled differently. So a lot of families, we just say, or we use a little grant money, whatever it is, we're going to come to the home. We want to do this in the evening. We want to do this, you know, of course, you know, a Saturday afternoon. But when the family is available, right, the mood is social and casual. The most important part of customized employment, easily the number one thing is we have to be able to effectively explain that this isn't going and applying for a job at McDonald's, okay? So you want to start, it takes about a year to get good at this, and we want to work with the willing. We want to start with families that are invested. You know, we don't want to cherry pick the most capable person. We want to work with the family, and we don't want to work with the person with 37 different disabilities that has nobody, because this is a learning process. We want you to have success, and we want you to gain confidence. So, and sometimes, you know, there's a guy that I'm working with in Pennsylvania. He's been in job development for 3 years. And Dad says, I want my son to work at Wegmans. They live 3 blocks away. And I say, they haven't hired anybody 3 years. We have to try another way. This isn't for everybody. If somebody's just locked into, get my kid a job in the next 10 minutes. But the problem with that is Johnny's had 4 jobs in the last 18 months, and he's lasted 2 months each time. So maybe it's time to try another way. But we have to effectively explain the process and it being a little bit different, that we're not going to be out filling out applications. So what I do these days, having a lot of success, and this afternoon I think we're going to do some vocational themes mapping with the staff that are come. So this is an example of a young man in California named Hunter, and Hunter had worked in an office setting for a short period of time, and he hated his job. And then his dad retired, and what we discovered was all of his themes and his interests. We also found out that he was sitting on about a $18,000 pass. So he'd been spent doing the community have things, cleaning dog cages for 3 years. We met the family. His mom said, he really doesn't like dogs. Maybe we should move on. So as we got to know Hunter, we figured out that his themes were animation, photography, graphic design. He was a Dodger fan. So what we did was we did this in a staff meeting with a group in California in about 2 hours. So we took this document and we brought it to the family when we did the home visit. We plastered it on the wall and we said, help us fill in. Tell us if we're correct. Does this make sense? And they thought we were pretty good. We recently did this in Iowa, and I got to tell you, the nicest family. We had it about 85% correct, and I hadn't met the young man yet, but the parents about fell off the couch. What the staff had said was he really likes being outside in cold weather. And his mom and dad just lost it. Like, where did you get that? He's the biggest wimp. We live in Iowa. He needs to be 72 or about. So we clarified that. So the family, this started the conversation with the family about where are we looking, what are we looking for, and then if we have that, and with the community action team, we want to have Uncle Harry there. We want to have Bruce from the church. We want to have people who know people. And when they see this, they're like, that's all you're asking for? You're helping us to make these connections? Well, my brother lives, owns the graphic design shop around the corner is what you hear, particularly in small communities. So, with the themes mapping, we want to find out about personal attributes. We want to find out about skills, conditions of employment, tasks that people have performed in the past. And interests are important, but interests are what they are. We have to find out if people have, if we're looking for a vocational theme, we have to find an interest, but we have to pair it with some skills. So this is Hunter, and so Hunter is the young man who's Asian young man on the left. And we went out and we found the eye stitch imprint. One of the staff went and did the research and bopped in and talked to Alex. And it's really interesting, the culture in California. There's so much multicultural. So Alex's whole family is from like downtown Russia, but he speaks, much more fluent English than I do, and he's very charismatic. So the staff went in and said, we've got this guy who's interested in the type of work you do. Could we bring him by for, say, 45 minutes? You could give us some advice. So they did that, and they clicked, and everything, and they said, do you suppose we could bring Hunter by for a couple afternoons, and he could learn some skills? So Alex was like, sure, he's kind of fun. So this is about the 3rd time they brought him by, and Alex is teaching Hunter how to do Photoshop, and I just don't know how to do Photoshop. Well, it turns out Hunter is pretty good at Photoshop. So I'm there this day, and Alex says, hey, can I buy you a cup of coffee? He drags me in the back, and he says, so you guys get paid to get people jobs, right? Because Hunter's kind of stolen our hearts around you. You are going to get him a job, right? So how do we fit into that? And I said, well, we're trying to figure out what kind of work. Before we go out and put in an application, do all that stuff, we want to make sure we're doing the right thing. And he said, well, I'll tell you what would be the right thing. He needs to work at a place like this. He fits like a glove around here. He's got all kinds of skills. So my comment was, well, could you envision, Hunter working here? And he's like, well, slow down, Tiger. I've got 2 kids in college and a niece. They all work here. I can barely pay for college now. and I can, barely pay my mortgage. So I started talking about started talking about Hunter has this asset, and it was a past, and we didn't, describe Social Security, not all our lingo. But I said he's sitting on this resource, and I said, is there anything, have you been to the trade show lately? Is there anything that you would know of that would help you generate more revenue to make more money? So he took me in the back and he showed me a first generation garment printer. Are you switching? Okay. Yeah. So garment printer, and this was the second generation. So there was a Brothers garment printer, and it was first generation. It wasn't very good. So Brother didn't want to lose him as a customer. He said, we'll let you trade this in on the other one, but the one you see in the picture was $13,000. He said, well, I don't have $13,000, but I'd be willing to trade in this for $5,000. So we used Hunter's past plan to buy the garment printer, and the first year they had it in the shop, it helped them generate another $65,000 in income. So it's the idea of hiring a person with a disability that helps with the bottom line, because we forget that most of us, when we work somewhere, there's that expectation that you help pay bills, right? So these are the kind of things that when we look at economic development strategies. The other thing was we took some local grant money, and we helped with a private organization set up a revolving loan fund, and Hunter was the first person that paid it off. So this organization uses this revolving loan fund to help people all the time. Oftentimes when I'm dealing with voc rehab counselors, they kind of like this and they freak out. They're like, oh my God, if I went and told my supervisor I want to buy a $13,000 piece of equipment, they might freak out. I'm like, well, we normally ask voc rehab just to pay for discovery or placement. And what we want people to know is you're not in this alone, right? There's a team, and there's just so many different ways to pay for this stuff. The disability industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. We just have to figure out how to work together a little more effectively and to move the money and pay for the right things. Thank you, Deb. So I think we've covered this slide. So I'm hoping on the other end, if somebody can play Hunter's video. And before you play the video, I've only worked with 3 of them in my life. That Hunter is a voluntary mute. So he went 12 years one time without speaking to anybody but his mother. So Hunter's going to tell you his story as how he's morphing from his job to a small business owner, and he tells the story a lot better than I do. And I'm hoping the video is going to work. Let's just have somebody click on it and hope that it works. Mm-hmm. You want me to click on it here? Can people see this? Oh, the sound's got to come back. Can I hear the sound? I don't know what's going on. I just stopped it. All right, I'm hoping you can hear this. Here we go.
This is Julia. Can anybody hear that? This is Julia. Can anybody hear it?
I think you have to put your own volume up on your computer.
It is. Oh. I don't have my headphones on. Okay, thanks.
I'm on speakerphone, and I can't hear
it. The noise is coming actually from the computer. The noise comes from the computer, not the phone.
I suggest that I'm going to type the link into the chat box and people look at the video afterwards.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay.
Thank you. It is pretty fun. So Hunter tells his story of how he did all this himself. It's kind of a tough video to do through webinar. So moving on. So this concept of resource ownership is actually one of my colleagues, Griffin-Hammis, kind of invented years ago, and it's now a part of the Rehab Act, and it's recommended by the Department of Labor. So let me pick on the voc rehab counselors in the room. You not only have exploitable skills, you have initials. So when you sign off on documents, the state and the feds can bill for your time. So myself, you know, I have a bachelor's degree in psych, I have a master's, I have an MBA, but I don't have the skills you have, but I also don't have the initials to pay bills, or an occupational therapist sometimes gets, you know, paid. When they sign their names, bills get paid, and people have skills, or if somebody went to college, or if somebody went to be a plumber or an electrician, those exploitable skills. People with disabilities often don't have that, or with equipment. Often if you're a trucker, you own your own truck. If you're a plumber, you own your own tools. So people with disabilities often don't have those advantages. So with resource ownership, we're going to help a person with a disability. After we build a relationship with an employer, and perhaps, you know, job placement is still the most natural way to go. But if we have this relationship with a mom and pop employer, we have oftentimes people I work, you have a person who has Fragile X syndrome, or a person on the autism spectrum who's nonverbal. But the person is, you know, fits like a glove with this employer. And the comment says, could you envision Joey working here? And they're like, Joey would fit in here like a glove. We love Joey. The problem is we simply don't have the revenue to add another set of hands. So resource ownership would be, do you have a need? Is there something that your business could be generating revenue through a piece of equipment, through a piece of software, through training that could help you generate enough revenue to have another set of hands around? And people often will quickly tell you what that is. The other thing with resource ownership is there's this expectation that it still is owned by the person with a disability. We write up a formal document, and we can get into that later, how it's owned, what happens if the person moves on. Those are all great things. So getting back to the community action teams, we've been having a lot of luck working with high schools lately. So the community action team with high schools, we ask family and friends, transition coordinators to come together. We've been working with Eastern Camden High School, and this is a high school had a long way to come. Last year, we asked them, we did the training, and we asked them to focus on 4 students. We had 3 students who graduated last year, and one's going to graduate this year. 2 of the students were on the spectrum that were nonverbal, and after we taught people the process, 3 jobs were developed by family members, like aunt developed one, an uncle developed one, and a dad developed one, as in they got the connection after they figured out. We were in this one home, and the dad had this reputation that he supposedly had a mental health disability. He was aloof. He didn't deal with anybody. We walked in, and Dad had just retired, and he was a mechanic. And it turned out that the themes for his son were being mechanical. And we talked about where are we going to find these places, and Dad always said, my God, I'm the one with all the connections. I'm the one who knows all these people you know. Let me make some phone calls. So, but people have to be empowered to know those kind of things. Again, you know, time and time again, how do we know our community? So the next screen is my friend Chris, who's also from New Jersey. And Chris is a young man on the spectrum, and he's a young man who also has a really significant problem with anxiety. We're really going to have to chill him out. At some point in time, he gets hospitalized just by being so stressed, his heart races and all this stuff. But what happened in Chris's case, am I moving screen? Okay. So Chris has a strong interest in working as a mascot. And what happened with Chris was when we were working with him in high school, and Chris went to a high school dance, and he went as the he went as a dragon, and everybody got the biggest kick out of that, and he did really well. And if you've ever done the mascot thing, I put that mascot uniform on, and I'm hot, and I'm claustrophobic, and I don't like it. When Chris puts a mascot uniform on, all of a sudden this kid that's always stressed chills out, and he's just in his element. So he was at this high school dance, it was a Halloween dance, and everybody made a big fuss, like, wow, Chris, this is really you. So we set up, the spring he graduated, he was the Easter Bunny at the mall. So the next screen, the next one that I told the screen out was he did the part-time gig at Chick-fil-A. And during this, as the team found as a guy named Dave Raymond, and Dave's is the next picture with Pirate Pete. Dave used to be the original Philly fanatic, and he was the head of the marketing with the Phillies. And if you don't know this, the Phillies are the losingest team in professional sports ever. And Dave was going to get fired because they weren't entertaining kids and they couldn't put butts in seats. So he invented the costume. He did the whole bit. And so the connection, somebody knew Dave, and they said, we have this kid that's interested in being a mascot. So, and I apologize, I hate to, if I'm going backwards here. So when we have meetings, Dave is on the is a part of the community action team, and Scott is the guy who has a professional mascot company. So when they show up, it's like a board meeting. We just do what we're told. These guys set up all of Chris's work. They're like his professional managers, and they do this all for free. So these are people in the community. Once we figure out what people want, is relationships are always based on commonality, so we can go to someone saying, particularly if somebody has a business a little bit different off the beaten path, I have this person who's interested in the type of work that you do, okay? So pushing for the community action teams. So the interesting that happened with Chris was Dave and his business partner, Dave trains mascots from all over the country, and then his business partner makes the costume. So we took a little bit of grant money, and we contracted with Dave to create the Pirate Pete costume. So Chris is now Pirate Pete for a local minor league baseball team. And when he's on vacation, if somebody ever uses his uniform, he gets paid a commission. So again, using economic development strategies. Okay. This next picture, I apologize for the quality, but this is a newer one. This is Kate. And Kate's a young woman who has a physical disability. And from the neck up, she's cute as a bug and she's pretty bright. And from the wrists on down, she's pretty much all but paralyzed. So she'd been in job placement with Voc Rehab for about 3 years, and there was question about what are we going to do, and we spent a lot of time at the kitchen table with tears and all this kind of thing. But we built this community action team. It became pretty clear that she had some skills in an office setting. She's smart as a bug. So there's a young man working with in New Jersey named Brian, and Brian is an amazing employment specialist, and he's a recovering alcoholic. And he's a really, if you know the idea, he's been clean and sober for about 15 years, but he goes to AA meetings about 3 times a week. And my dad, who's a recovering alcoholic, would say, people that are addicted to the program, which is a nice problem to have. But he has all these intimate relationships. So we met at a restaurant with his friends, and we brought Kate and Kate's family. So his friend Dave was listening, and he was one of these Lisas in the world who understands marketing and on business. So I get a call from Dave about a week later, and he said, I developed a job for Kate. Can you meet me at Starbucks on Thursday? We're going to negotiate the job. And my glasses are on sideways. I'm like, you developed a job for Kate. This is a young woman that needs full physical support, to do anything but think. You developed a job for Kate. Yeah, just show up, Corey. I got it handled. And he wouldn't tell me anything. So I called Brian, his best friend. I said, what is going on? He said he won't tell me anything. He just told, So I show up, and this young woman comes in, and the young woman just, stunningly beautiful. She's about 24, and she's in a white Mercedes. I'm like, white Mercedes, 24. Okay. And she walks in with me, and what happened was this is a young woman who had lived in South Dakota, and she's very charismatic, and she developed an event planning business. And what she focuses on are kids' birthday parties. And again, they're about $1,000 a pop on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And what the problem with her business is, she's a one-man operation. She works out of a coffee shop in her one-bedroom studio apartment. She has a cash flow problem because she can't keep her invoices going. During the meeting, she let 3 jobs go because it would have been rude to pick up in the middle of the meeting. So we negotiated, Kate and this young woman negotiated her job, and the problem is there's no office. So Kate's dad's an engineer, and we said, well, maybe I should come to to Kate's home and train her at the house a little bit. Kate's dad saw what was coming. He immediately took her bedroom and turned it into an office. This relationship is 18 months old, and the business address for the business is Kate's employer's address, but they work out of Kate's bedroom, which has become an office. And Kate's family's really happy because they don't have to send a nurse around town. So the business is actually located now in Kate's, and most of it's online. And they're doing tremendous. And they're 2 young women about the same age. So a lot of work went into this, though, but this was somebody we'd had in job placement for 4 or 5 years. And I got a big hug from the voc rehab counselor, like, Corey, I was going to close her a half dozen times. Like, thank God we didn't. And the voc rehab counselors never met Dave. And she said, we've got to meet Dave. I got to meet him. She wasn't there that day. So one of the other things we do with the customized strategy in avoiding big sign syndrome is neighborhood mapping, right? Most people with disabilities are transportationally impaired, and oftentimes in metropolitan areas, we're developing these jobs where somebody has to, get on a bus and go somewhere. So job development's got to start, particularly in a rural area, in the driveway. And, I did work in San Diego and LA, Debbie can tell you, for about the toughest 15 months of my life. It was so tough, in those communities where the people don't have relationships. The city of San Diego, people live there for like 3 years at a time. There's often no social capital. So when you're in places like Maine, where people have real neighbors and they have real relationships, get to know the neighborhood, get to know employers. What are we going to do for transportation? And the other thing is I'm in Maine, Corey, this is transportation problem. Please don't ever ask me to be on the transportation committee again, because my answer is going to be, quit looking for jobs 35 miles from somebody's home. Neighbors, activities. We're looking for businesses. What is the culture like? Is there the friendly neighbor that knows somebody? Other safety concerns. What can we do? My boss, Kerry Griffin, tells this great story that I'm just going to steal this morning. He was working in Utah, and Kerry says, he's a Mormon wannabe. And like, Kerry, why are you such a Mormon fan? He said, well, when you do home visits in Utah, 6 or 8 brothers and sisters show up, and they know everybody. So Kerry's at a home visit on a Friday night, and the employment specialist that had a sick kid said, Kerry can't make it. That's all right, I'll just cover it. So he's meeting with this family, and mom and dad are wonderful, and everything's happened, and about 8 o'clock, it's time to cut it off. And Kerry says, is there anything else about your son that now that you know me that I should know? And the mom looks at, they look at each other, yeah. Well, Kerry, we're kind of churchy around here. My son's 24, he has autism, he's nonverbal, but he's starting to want to make adult decisions. So he tells us he doesn't want to go to church anymore. So every Sunday now, we go to church, and he disappears at about 10:30. He comes back at about 10 o'clock. So we know he's safe. It's a small town, but we don't know where he goes. So Kerry said, can I follow you on Sunday? So Kerry follows him. He walks down this alley, and he walks into this gentleman's garage, and he has food sitting on the picnic table for him. And Carrie walks in with David, and it was like, the guy says, well, hi, I'm Dave, and everything. Oh, you met my buddy and everything. And they're talking about cars. And the first thing this guy asked him, he said, what's his name? He said, what do you mean? My buddy. He's nonverbal. He's never told me his name. And Carrie's like, he tells him his name, and he said, well, how did this relationship happen? He said, well, I was working on my car one day, and he was in the alley, and I got to be honest with you, I'm not, always that comfortable with people with disabilities. There he is waving at me, and he wouldn't go away. So I handed him a tool, and we started working on cars, and Carrie said, well, what's the other side of the story? Well, I'm not that churchy myself, so my wife is always bugging me to go to church, and I tell my wife, well, honey, if I go to church, I'm going to disappoint my buddy, and he won't, we won't get to hang out. So this guy owns a garage, and he hired him 2 weeks later. Okay. This next photo is Josh, and Josh lives in Bedford, Pennsylvania. It's about an hour and a half east of Pittsburgh. And we met Josh, and he just showed up at the sheltered workshop, and he showed up the first 3 days, and there was downtime, and he didn't quite get it. So he came home, and he put his finger across his throat and said, Mom, I'm not going back. So as we got to know Josh, there was a local sport employment program we'd always worked with, and they had set him up for an interview at a Burger King for a lot and lobby job 35 miles from his home. The local transportation couldn't get him 3 miles away from home. Like, guys, what are you thinking? So as we started the discovery process, if you met Josh, he's the type of kid, if you see him on a scooter or on a snowmobile or a four-wheeler, he's somebody that should be in the X Games. You don't see disability. You just see this savant thing going on. So as we got to know the family, he's always out in the garage with his dad and his grandpa, and he's covered in grease. Now, can't put much back together, but he can sure tear something apart. So we're thinking about where do we know these folks? So the guy from the sheltered workshop that ran the lawn crew, he had, the agency had all of their work done at Gary's garage. And Gary's garage is a rural area 2 miles from Josh's home. So we did the informational interview, and Gary's like, I've known Josh since he was 5 years old. His grandparents get their cars worked on. His parents get their cars worked on here. What are you working on? And we said, we want to see if he's got any skills. So Gary's grandson, who went to high school, Josh grabs him and teaches him how to change oil. I'm like, yeah, he's got skills. Now what do you want to know? And we started this conversation, and he said, there's 6 bays, and there's no job available. But Josh has the OCD part of, autism, and he's always washing the car at home. Have you ever thought about detailing cars? So in this picture, you see the piece of cement. The woman who I worked with, she's a retired special ed teacher, had her brother come in and put a piece of cement down, because that's what you do in the community in Bedford. In Bedford, we use DD Council grant, $1,000 to put up that little shed. And so Josh, but you really have to have skills. So the woman who did this hired the agency who did the job coaching before, job coach Josh, and after 3 days, a young man, a Penn State football player, never met a person with a disability before, walked up to the employer and said, Josh can't do this job. Can I bring somebody high functioning in? The employer flipped out, invited him off of his property. He coached him that afternoon. It's Memorial Day weekend. Josh's dad coached him one day, and his grandfather another day. So what happened was the person that knew systematic instruction came in the next week, and within 2 weeks he was detailing 6 cars a day. So, everything's going great. And then I get a call from Gary next time I'm in the area. He said, you got to stop by. You're not going to believe what happened. He said he got a call from the local mental health board. His best friend from high school is on the mental health board. People heard about Josh's story, and the mental health board wanted to hire Gary to maintain all their fleet of vehicles, of like 25 vehicles with tune-ups, emissions testing, and the whole bit. So he said, hiring this kid's made me more money doing this than anything else. But again, this is off like a dirt track in the middle of Pennsylvania. Places that I know that are all over. Places I'm sure that we're struggling in Maine. Moving on, I just put this in if there was somebody that was hearing impaired to just read the slides. Okay. If you need the slides, I can email them to you as well.
They'll get them with the link, evaluation link.
Great. So one of the questions we have with customized employment is people say, this takes too long. This is too touchy-feely. I don't have time. I have a big caseload. Well, we finally started doing research on this, and this is one of the organizations we work with out of Minnesota. We worked with for a few years. And what the research shows, in September of 2005, the average person losing their job took 26.3 weeks, 6 months to land the next job. So when we work with their agency now, and again, customized employment, those people that don't stick in typical job placement, those folks, we aren't ever able to get entry-level jobs for right away, needing a customized strategy. After 6 months, 42% of those folks have attained a good job. And after 9 months, 71%. And that's not their goal. They want to get better. One of the other problems with customized employment is we have people with big caseloads, and somebody's got, I've got a job development caseload of 25. And so people are time and time again working with the most capable person to quickly move on. We all feel all that pressure. And then the person with the more significant disability is always at the bottom of the list. So we start the process, we do a home visit, we do something, and oh, it's been 6 months. We ask people, what did you do? Well, yeah, I didn't get back to that. So what we're saying is this has to be fluid. This has to be done as a project. And these are the issues that when people say it takes too long, it doesn't take that long if we prioritize it. So developing an active employer council, we're working with right now, we have a proposal into a university that we're going to be doing this with in Pennsylvania, and we have a piece we can send you on how to develop an active employer council. We use people's board of directors. We use agency staff. We invite small businesses to be involved. Once we build these relationships, and we meet with we buy these people breakfast basically once a month. We email them 2 or 3 vocational profiles of people we're working with. We simply say, do you know people in these industries? We're not asking them to hire anybody else. We're asking for their social connections. I was working in Ohio about 2 years ago, and the organization I was working with out of Youngstown, and they traditionally just work with people with mental health disabilities. And their executive director was a very charismatic guy. He met us once, and he said, I have to apologize. I'm never going to be around. You're never going to see me. But Lisa, the person who was the employment specialist, knows her stuff. This guy knows everybody. She sends him an email every time she gets stuck, and it doesn't matter where he's at. It comes back, call my brother-in-law Dave, call this guy, call this person. It's like having those honorary mayors. But these active employer councils really work well, and we can show you how to staff this with like a full-time position and how you increase your placements enough to pay for a full-time position to just deal with these kind of issues. So, thank you. So what we're looking at is how do we find these kind of places? People are like, we're having problems with figuring out discovery activities. We're having problems finding these artists and businesses. And what I want to really advocate for people with, and I wish I could see your hands, is that most of us, the fastest growing part of our caseload are people with mental health issues with criminal backgrounds. So customized employment works great for people with intellectual disabilities, really works for people with autism. But I think the group we're having the most success with these days are people with chronic, people with schizophrenia, people that are bipolar, people that have a criminal background. And folks, if you realize they're never going to get through human resources. So we have to find out, what they're good at. So there's a guy in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania that I work with by the name of Dan. And I have a release for all this, and Dan's pretty proud of himself, and I'm real proud of Dan. So Dan has schizophrenia, and Dan chooses not to take medication because it dulls him, and he's not as smart as he wants to be. So Dan has, let me just say, Dan has issues, a lot of issues. He never graduated from high school, but as we got to meet Dan, we figured out he's a genius, and he's an inventor. So if you can see the screens, you guys are a little bit landlocked around here, but one of the things he develops all these new age racing sailboats. It's like being in this place, I'm sure you guys have been to Newport, Rhode Island, and like one of that's where Dan belongs. So I got a little intimidated, like, what am I going to do with this guy? He's smart. I'm scared. So our former board president runs a local junior college, and I emailed him and said, I got this guy, have you got any ideas? And he wrote back that there's so many economic development functions out there. The local junior college had developed what they call the Fab Lab. And they hired some retired engineers through the college to teach classes on how to be an inventor. And people are there learning how to make Martin guitars and doing stuff all the time. So we took Dan's inventions, put them in a big banana box, and the guys opened the top. These are 3 retired Lehigh University engineers, and the quality of his work just freaked them out. They're like, whoa, you might send this guy directly to Lehigh. We might not be smart enough for Dan. So we got to know the guys, and they said, is there something simple you've developed? And if you guys know what a hand truck is, or a two-wheeler in a grocery store that you use to move product around, or what you use to pull the hot water heater out of your basement, well, the problem with those is you're dealing with a lot of weight. And sometimes those can be kind of dangerous if you drop them. Like, you know, think about you're pulling the hot water heater out of your basement on Saturday morning, and you're not as strong as you thought you were, and you're about to drop it down through the drywall. Dan developed a foot brake, and it had never been sold, so they found a local company that develops these hand trucks, and they're currently selling the idea of the hand truck. There's a lawyer involved, thank God, because I'm in so far over my head, and they're talking price. So the next thing that happens, they offer Dan a part-time job to work there, and these are his people. So if they have the 3D printer and he can use all the plastic he wants, he can play with his inventions. He's the staff person there. But the best part of this story is we're about to walk out and doing backflips, you know, one of my best days in this field. And the guy said, Dan, if you got a minute, we've got to show you something. 3 retired engineers. I mentioned Dan never graduated from high school, right? They pull out a wrist, a hand that they're developing this robotic hand and wrist. Dan, we want your opinion on if we're in the right direction. 3 retired engineers asking Dan's opinion. And he looked up at me like, they want my opinion. And this is a guy who is on the verge of getting kicked out of his apartment every 2 minutes. He has a lot of social, but he found his place. And again, these are the places in the community when we get off the beaten path and we stop spending all our time filling out applications online. These are the places that we find. Again, I put this screen in. If somebody couldn't hear it, that they could read this. And this pretty much breaks down everything that I just told you. So with customized strategies, you know, we can always, at the end of discovery, we can develop a typical wage job. I worked in the grocery store industry forever. My dream is to go back to Michigan when I retire and sort bottles on Saturday nights and, you know, and listen to the radio. Those are still good jobs. The problem is we're not able to get as many of those as we used to. In some communities, they're not available. We're able to develop non-typical wage positions. You know, with supported employment, we said we were really good at job carving, and I don't know if we were that good at it. But with customized employment, there's a young guy from New Jersey. He calls it job cobbling. It's like we get to know the person, we figure out what their skills are, and then we go in and we negotiate something. We can do resource ownership. You know, we can do self-employment. We can do a business within a business. So there's all these other opportunities when there isn't, you know, that 9-to-5 job available.
We've got about 5 minutes, and there's at least one question.
Okay. You want to deal with the question now?
I think we can. It's a question about, can you scroll up? If a person can use a past plan, does the person need to be directly involved in using the piece of equipment that they might bring in with a past plan?
The answer is yes, basically. And sometimes we have it so the person doesn't have to be the only person using it. Oftentimes the person uses it on their shift and other people use it, but the person has to somehow be actively involved with using it. Great question. So I wanted to get through customized internships because it's the thing I'm the most fired up about these days. So with WIOA, we now have the, I'm sitting in here with the One Stop, right? And I have Betsy here. So let me tell you, I was in Idaho, and I trained this fall. I trained every voc rehab counselor in the state of Idaho on discovery process. So we're sitting in Idaho at the hotel, and the regional director from VR is there, and the person from the One Stop's there, and a friend of mine from the DD Council set this up. And we're 2 days, we're having a blast. And as a voc rehab counselor, I'm a Packer fan, and we're giving each other a hard time. We're really hitting it off. And at lunch, he drags me off. He said, "Are you as good as you think you are?" Like, "Oh boy, let's find out." He took me out to lunch with the employment specialist they were working on, and they had this opportunity for a paid internship. So at the end of the day, we sat down with the voc rehab division manager and the One Stop person and said, "Can you help?" Well, the voc rehab division manager is pretty charismatic and said, "I'll pay half if you pay half." And I know sometimes with the workforce system, it's not that easy, but we want to develop it that way. So if we're co-located at the One Stops, they can pay for internships. They're going to pay for summer employment. They can pay for all these things. We just have to have them help out. So as we really need to, this is in WIOA, and if we're co-located, we might as well work with these folks. And right now, I don't think they know this stuff, but we can help them.
That's great. This is Betsy. If anybody has those opportunities that come up, by all means, let me know. That's a great example of how it should work.
Great. So this is Matthew from Running Out of Time. So Matthew is another young guy from New Jersey, and New Jersey is not as good at employment as you guys are. And when we got the referral, Matthew was labeled as a young man with mild intellectual disability, serious mental health issues, and he was kind of artsy. That's all we got. So when we did the home visit, it's a Greek family. They fed us a 5-course meal. We saw the art stuff. Dad said, "Take him down the basement." He runs the grinder. He does. He knows how to solder. He makes changes scissors into other scissors. He's made knives with his dad. And I'm sitting there with the voc rehab counselors after 2.5 hours, and I have to go get my kids. And she's like, "Corey, where are you going?" I got to go get my kids. They're going to cook us dinner. So we got to know Matthew through discovery, and this issue was that he's really mechanical. So they found a place where they did sandblasting. They took paint off, and they do this fancy paint. So he's being mechanical, and he's being artsy. And what they did right now was the grant is paying for the job coaching right now, and then voc rehab is paying for an OJT. So the question is how voc rehab is going to respond to internships, and some people think we can just maybe bastardize the OJT, or we can get workforce to pay for something through partnership. So Matthew is a guy who was deemed unemployable about a half dozen times, and he's working 30 hours a week. The OJT was 6 weeks. He just finished it, 30 hours a week, and I think he's making $14 an hour. This next one is a similar situation where we developed an internship doing welding in Utah. Guy had a traumatic brain injury, and he works full-time now. So customized employment is a hands-on approach, and we hear so much about employer engagement. It's all about employer engagement, right? So instead of doing sales calls and applying for jobs online, we get behind the scenes. We get to know small employers, and people have to be. We have to supervise people a little bit different. We have to talk about these are the successes along the way that we're able to negotiate positions, right? We're always all the stories that I'll show you. These were all negotiated jobs where there was no sign in the door saying we're hiring today. We use supply chain mining. This is stole from Kerry Griffin, my boss, a young guy, where his themes were transportation and employment, and you can see all the places that sent him to other places. And he has 2 jobs. He's the announcer at the local racetrack, and he works for a mobile recording studio. But these are all the people in the community that connected all these different places. So the other sign is the supply chain mining for if somebody needs to be able to read this. And I think those of you have had some training in informational interviews, and I think we're running out of time. And we can do more training on informational interviews, but this is how we set this up through the informational interview process. And I think I'll cut it off right there, Deb, if people have questions, because we're kind of running out of time.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Corey. Fabulous. Many of us will have the opportunity to spend this afternoon with Corey, learning even more. And he'll be back. He'll be doing some webinars with the community practice folks, the VR staff, and others around the connection between job development or discovery and job development. So we're thrilled to have you. Any final words here? No. All right, thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Joyce will be sending out the PowerPoint and the link to the evaluation, and stay tuned for the webinar scheduled for next month. We're still working on that.
If you have other questions, you can email me.
Thanks, Corey.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.